Welcome, explorers. Fasten your taste bud, folks. This is the Flavor Expedition, and we're ready to embark on an incredible journey through the world of flavors. We're diving into the depths of food trends, exploring exotic taste, and navigating the ever-evolving food and beverage industry. Buckle up as we take off to explore the delicious, the daring, and the downright delightful dishes from across the globe. We are ready to set your palates on flavor-packed adventure, so let's get rolling. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome back to the Flavor Expedition. I'm your host and co-host, Dan Follacy, along with my partner in crime, Chase Obachain. Hey, Chase. Say hello.
Oh, hello. Good to see you today, Dan, and good to be here with you. We have a very fun guest to speak with. Very excited, but I'll let you do the introduction.
Yeah, he's a really spicy guest, I'll tell you that. A lot to talk about, full of flavor and excitement, and actually, I'm really excited to talk to this guy. Tony is fantastic. Tony Reed is who we're talking about. Currently, he's the Senior Director of Innovation and Partnerships with Spiceology. That's that spice company with the really killer labels that everyone can easily identify, right? So they're tired of like squinting at these things as we get older. They just did the big scientific formulation, and they made it really easy and really cool to look at spices. So that's who's joining us today. Hey, Tony, why don't you say hello and welcome to the show?
Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks for having me on, Dan. Chase, great to finally meet you in person as well.
You as well, sir.
Yeah, Chase. I actually bumped into Tony a couple years ago, and obviously we've seen the Spiceology stuff around for a while. You're not Mr. Spiceology, but it kind of follows you along. It's like when you work for a certain manufacturer. I recall I worked for a dairy manufacturer who was fantastic, but the customers would say, "Oh, you're the cheese chef." And I'm like, hold on, guys, I appreciate that, but I'm not the cheese chef. So I imagine you're not just the spice chef. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I get the spice guy a lot. So that's probably the one I get a lot. But yeah, it's I get to be the one that creates all the product nowadays. So I kind of am for the company at the moment. But
Yeah, awesome. Well, Chase, you know what? Why don't you kind of help us understand and remind everyone our format, and then we'll jump into kind of what that is. I think it'd help us get into the move of things.
Yeah. We'll set the tone, set the mood of sorts for our listeners. So if you're new, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And if you are a seasoned, no pun intended, flavor explorer with us, welcome back. But, we have a kind of standard set that we like to follow, a sort of a progression of sorts. We like to move from past to present to future as time, of course, moves, and talk about, any given topic from those different lenses, thinking of where, I suppose in this case, we'll probably talk about spices and where they've come from and their historical applications and context to the present day. And then we'll do a little bit of a kind of look into the future, see what we can get out of Tony, what he sees on the horizon, and what we might also think on our side as well.
Yeah, perfect. So, I think one of the things Chase and I have talked about many times, Tony, I'd love to hear your what kind of story you guys share around the history of spices, in general, because spices are historically they've been traded for a long time. They've been held in really high regard. There's castles literally built around salt flats and things of that nature to protect them because they were more valuable than gold and other minerals. So love to kind of hear what kind of story that you have around that and thoughts of where that's taken us and what kind of flavors you've seen along the way. This is a very multi-loaded question, by the way. But what kind of flavors or spices that you've seen or maybe heard of in the past that are still around that make a lot of sense to today's cuisines?
Yeah, I mean, spice has been a trade piece since the beginning of time. It feels like, right? And people, you kind of mentioned, people have fought wars over spice. A good example, the first thing I ever learned about like a war around spice when I joined Spiceology was actually how how Manhattan Island came about.
Ooh,
It was
tell us that.
actually, yeah, it was, there was a war over an island with a ton of nutmeg on it. They wanted to occupy that island and be able to trade the nutmeg, and um, the loser ended up getting Manhattan out of it. So just, um, I think it worked out for both parties.
Fair to
Yeah.
say.
But that was like kind of the first introduction to the story of spice that I really had as a young culinarian. Um, spice early on in my culinary career, it was just an ingredient that I used all the time. I didn't really, it's one of those things you kind of take for granted.
Sure.
A lot of people do. I think as you get through the ranks of being a culinarian or a cook or chef or whatever you want to call yourself, you begin to realize how important they truly are. And it's not all about salt and pepper. There's all kinds of different things out there that can really change a flavor profile to any dish. But yeah, that was kind of my introduction to the history of spice, um, and Spiceology was kind of the introduction to just how spices work for me. I worked primarily in Asian restaurants, and so I worked with a lot of unique ingredients that most people don't use on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Things like Sichuan peppercorns,
Sure.
fermented black beans, ginger, even, a lot of people use ginger, but just more on a regular basis. So I didn't realize how much knowledge and broad knowledge I had around spices because I had used a lot of things that most people don't use. Um,
Yeah.
Sure.
Sichuan peppercorn being one of them.
I think it's interesting that you
Right
comment
on.
around working in the Asian cuisine and dining, because my very first job was working in a truly authentic Szechuan Chinese restaurant where the chefs were literally all from Szechuan, China. The tickets were written in Chinese, and I had no idea what was going on, except I just loved the flavor of what they were creating. And I mean, I was 15, bussing tables and stealing shots of sake whenever I could, and that was really that was the extent of my exploration, was how much sake could I get off the tables, and
Oh
Oh
so
yeah.
my goodness.
unfortunately they got
Tony.
closed down for gambling on Chinese New Year's. They got raided, like they were legit gambling, so that's
Oh my
done.
gosh.
But
What a story.
I went to show up the next day for work, and then there's police lines on the door, and I'm like, "What's going on?" And I was told,
They found out about the kids stealing sake, it sounds like.
yeah,
Holy moly.
I think that's what it was, and thank goodness I was a minor, so they didn't catch me. But I think you allude to. I think there's a lot of mystery around spices, and in general the Eastern European or Asian, mid Asian spice world, because when you hear every year's report around spices, you always hear about Asian cuisine. You're starting to hear obviously about Middle Eastern cuisines hitting more of that market, and
Sure.
African
South
cuisines.
Asian, North African as well.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of mystery of how to use those spices, and I think that's a really interesting perspective of what kind of things did you learn there around spices that maybe we can take lessons from to apply into today's or other cultural cuisines.
Yeah, I mean, spices, it's when I'm making like a blend, for instance, I'm looking at it just like I would a plate. You want some heat, you want some
Mhm.
acid in there, you want a little bitterness. So and I can go on and on, but it's essentially like setting up the flavors that you want on a final dish, right?
Mm,
That you're putting together, and so utilizing different spices in that way to create that flavor profile. That's how I approach every single blend that I created for Spiceology. I almost want the flavors to be the finished product of what you would get on a plate, um,
Sure.
rather than building building up with like salt and pepper, or if you're talking, Indian cuisine, lots of turmeric and curries and whatnot. But I really want to be able um, to build the final flavor inside of a blend that I want to see the plate, have. So, a perfect example would be, Spiceology. We created a product called Blackberry Balsamic. It's a play on one of my favorite Hollywood, geez Louise, holiday time meals or side dishes.
Do you need some sake? I got some sake. Might help clear your throat.
No, sorry.
Ease the nerves.
But it's a sweet potato, blackberry balsamic, and goat cheese dish that I make all the time. So I wanted to create a blend that represented all the flavor profiles that I would have in that dish. So everything but the sweet potato is inside of that blend. Balsamic vinegar powders, blackberry, obviously, the garlic, shallots, all of that's built into there. And it tastes exactly how I would have that final dish, around Thanksgiving and Christmas time. So it's just trying to make sure that I'm building a dish inside of a jar. Really, that's always my goal.
So that's pretty awesome. I mean, hearing that you have things like blackberry in there and balsamic, it kind of brings up a question that somebody asked me a long time ago of how do you define what a spice is?
Yeah, good question.
Traditionally, we think of certain things as being spices, but it sounds like those are maybe a little bit unorthodox in the way we think of spices.
Honestly, for me, spices is anything that I can get in a powdered form.
Okay, sure.
So, everything from vinegar powders, honey, shit, man. I can just go on and on. Butter granules.
Yeah, you mentioned your first blend, and you're talking about goat cheese, and I'm thinking, well, are you putting dehydrated, goat cheese powders into that?
Not in that particular product, but I've created products that have milk powders, butter powders,
Sure.
black or blue cheese powder. One of Spiceology's best performing blends is called Black and Blue, which is a Cajun seasoning with dehydrated blue cheese powder folded into it, and then we actually turned that into a sauce over the last. We launched that in November, December of last year.
Yeah,
and so really anything that I can get in a powder form, that's a spice to me.
Sure,
if it's edible, obviously.
Yeah,
so
sure.
That's kind of how the philosophy at Spiceology really works. Like, we want to think outside the box, we want to innovate, and that's luckily for me, that's the job I get to do every day, is continually stretch the mind of what we can really get in a powdered form and put it into a bottle. So
that's a great explanation. I think that really opens up the floodgates, of innovation.
It has, it gets me in a lot of trouble sometimes with operations and accounting.
Sure.
Those start to add up a little bit.
Never worry about price, Tony. Listen, the one thing I know, price is always what everybody wants, and as a culinarian, we're all chefs. You talk to certain people behind the scene, the R&D people, the developers that are in the operations, and they'll tell you, the purchasing team doesn't like the price, and they don't want to put it. But when you have something consistently high quality and you're able to deliver that over and over again in a way that no one else can knock it off, because they're always trying to reformulate what you're doing. Someone's bringing your flavor to the next spice guy, because it happens with every product, and they can't duplicate it, or they can't consistently duplicate it. That ingredient is, and what your secret is per se, and you've got the right way to blend it and put it together. Price isn't really the issue. I know it does affect the conversation, but I think it's our obligation as chefs to go flavor first.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree with that statement. My Brenda, my CFO, if you're listening, just ignore all of that. But no,
Oh,
we
now I hope you don't get fired from this conversation.
no.
Getting people in trouble, Dan. My
Yeah,
goodness.
you're gonna have to be
Um,
the third official guest that's always on the show, just so you have something to do then.
seriously. Yeah. But no, man, it's you're right. And I think that's how Spiceology's really differentiated itself. That's how I've been able to differentiate myself as a culinarian, a cook, a chef in this world, is, being able to create a product that any home cook or chef can be proud of using. And sometimes that costs a little more. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think with how I've developed product and how I've sourced, the highest grade ingredients, that I possibly can find within reason, it we're able to create a product that is next to none. I don't think
yeah,
there's a lot of we have a handful of products that have not been able to be repeated in other companies. So
yeah.
Sure.
To the point in the story I said, yeah. Were you saying, or
Yeah,
Chase?
it's I was gonna say it's just interesting to think about it from a anything that can be dried perspective, because I think of some things as being kind of fresh spices, like garlic, and I think of onions, ginger. I think herbs really are very much in that kind of seasoning, flavoring kind of spice type world, where you think of thyme. Does it go from an herb to a spice once you have dried parsley or dried thyme or anything like that? Do you think that's a transformation that happens?
I would say that's I've never really thought about it that way, but I would say that's a pretty accurate statement.
Sure.
I would say, there's a lot of chefs that will stand up and probably argue with me about, you don't need all of those spices. You can do it all with, a garlic cloves or a stem of ginger, or you
Mhm.
can, you know, shred your horseradish right off the root, things like that. Which that's a great way to go about it. But in the world of, food costs and labor costs, that's where I really try to crack the code for how anyone that's worked in a restaurant understands the low margins that a
Yeah,
chef deals with, that a GM deals with, that a bartender deals with. There's
Sure.
if it wasn't for the bar, a lot of restaurants wouldn't exist, because that's generally what saves the margins.
true.
So that's really the attempt that I try to make when I'm developing a product, is how can I cut, how can I save pennies for the customer so they can earn dollars. I had a mentor teach me that very early on in culinary school, and
Mhm.
that's something that you know I brought to, or the team at Spiceology brought with the label. All of that is like creating efficiencies and consistencies that save you pennies, and that
Yeah.
those things add up.
Let me just kind of you mentioned your mentor, and you do some mentorship work yourself.
I do.
And I know we chatted about it on another conversation, as you actually bring students through Spiceology and give them a tour for the Pro Start program. Is that correct?
Yeah. We actually we just finished up our state competition 2 weeks ago, and the high school that I mentor, Ferris High School here in Spokane, we got third place in both culinary and hospitality business management. So we
Wow!
took home
Congratulations!
bronze
Very
in two
nice.
categories, and
Yeah,
um, yeah, it's the mentoring is something that is near and dear to my heart. It's you get to connect with these kids on a completely different level, and show them something that they're going to have to do in life anyways, so they might as well learn some skills to be good at it, which is cooking. um,
yeah,
Sure.
so it's not even about necessarily teaching them how to be a cook or a chef necessarily, but it's a lifestyle that they need to learn how to do. It's like learning, a lot of these kids are going to be out on their own after this year, being adults. So being able to give them just the basic life skills to understand how to use a knife and an oven, and a stove, and controlling heat, like that's
Yeah,
a
back in my days,
really,
because I'm an old man, that was called home economics.
yeah,
Sure, sure. Yeah.
Which
exactly.
was paired, half of the year was paired with the culinary side, which I truly enjoyed. The other side was like home making stuff. Like I had to
Yeah,
sew a
you had to learn to
pillow,
sew and all
right?
that
I'm
stuff.
like,
Yeah.
oh man, sewing a pillow? No, that's terrible. But ProStart's really interesting. You know, I think mentorship on whatever program or platform is really important, because sharing it, you know, you're still a relatively young guy, at least in visually speaking. You're aging well, Tony. So that being said, well, he's got a young, handsome profile. So that being said, at your age, you realize, hey, go giving back. I think it's really, really cool that you're helping out ProStar or that team, because ProStar goes pretty deep. The competitions are certainly gives them another level of understanding what pressure is. I share this only because my daughter did ProStart in her high school, and you know, her team went to nationals and ended up taking, I think, 13th. Which, hey, you know
Oh
what?
wow.
You're a high schooler and you went to nationals and the team took 13th place.
Absolutely.
That's not bad, you know. I mean, I think anyone who makes it to nationals, no matter what place they actually finish in, has walked away with a valuable lesson. So,
Yeah,
um,
I mean, we got um the kids, each kid that participated and placed a couple weeks ago, they got like I think $1,200 scholarships
Oh,
each
that's
student,
incredible.
even at third place. And I'm like, oh my god, like that's when I was in high school, this wasn't something that I understood was even available to me. It could
yeah,
have been.
Sure.
I don't remember this program being as prominent as it seems to be now. So it was just to see the faces of the students that even the one, we had two teams actually on the culinary side, and the other team got six, but they were even excited that they were able to create a 3-course meal in an
Sure.
hour with two freaking butane burners in
yeah,
a
Yeah.
10 by 10 space with four teammates. So it's like watching them achieve just finishing the in that hour is just it's a win. It's
yeah,
something that
Very
keeps me
cool.
coming back every single year.
yeah.
It's amazing.
So
Love
I'm
that.
curious, what from a flavor perspective and even a spice perspective, what's the first lesson you share with students about how to season and handle not food safety, but how to flavor what they're doing.
Honestly, it's taste and taste and taste, season, taste, and
Mhm.
uh, I'm pretty annoying that way. um, I'm constantly telling them like, "Did you taste your food?" We did a beef tartare is one of the dishes that we did, and they were terrified to try the beef.
Oh,
And I kept telling them like, if you're not going to eat this, you're not going to know what it tastes like, and it's
Mhm.
likely that when you put that food in front of the chef to get judged, it's going to taste like shit.
yeah,
And I tell them like
yeah.
straight up. And I was like, if it comes out and they say it tastes amazing, you're the luckiest cook in the
Yeah.
world. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
and so, getting them to constantly taste while they're cooking is the number one goal. Because that's the only way you can control it all, right? Just
yeah,
Sure.
continually
yeah,
trying to taste as much as you can through from start to finish.
yeah. Little by little, right? Because you can never
Yeah,
take it
the
back
other,
out.
last year I didn't do it much this year because I think I overdid it. But I had the kids cutting knife cuts for like 3 months before I even showed them a recipe because I
Oh,
Oh
was
wow.
like your Batnais, your Brunoise, your Juliennes. I'm like, you got to make sure that these are perfect. Then we got to competition. The judges spent very little time um, grading those knife skills. So this year I wasn't as hard on it, but yeah, it was. That's generally the two things that the students find me very annoying for is my constantly tasting and constantly making them do knife skills.
well, having their
Fair enough.
fingers for the rest of their career is actually pretty important, because although you're teaching them the specific cut, you're also teaching them how not to cut themselves.
Yeah, which That's funny. In the competition, never seen anyone cut themselves. We had 2 students cut themselves 2 weeks ago
Oh,
during
geez.
competition. Yeah, and
Never good.
as I say, I didn't spend much time on knife skills this year as I did last year, and that happened. So,
Yeah, yeah,
Of course. Got to get those reps in, right?
yeah, for real, man.
I totally get it.
yeah.
You know, no, it's just such an interesting and cool thing. The amount of like non-intuitive things that you don't always think about because they kind of become second nature, and you kind of come back to them once you're trying to teach, the next generation or show someone just a foundational level of learning. So I'm all
Yeah,
about just kind of setting a basis and saying this is a good place to start, and then we'll understand the basics and grow on it.
yeah, and the being able to, it's probably 3 to 4 months out of the year that I do this, and we go in twice a week. It's about an hour and a half each class, and that's what keeps my culinary skills sharp. It's just I'm
Sure.
continually teaching the most basic things, and so when I'm creating a recipe or creating a spice blend for whatever reason, like those basics are constantly ingrained in my head, and I don't. I make sure to remind myself where I started when I'm creating a product or a recipe, and so that's. I feel like the kids help me probably just as much as I help them when it comes to that.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I was gonna ask you, about, the when have you ever seen the light bulb turn on? I know for me, like when flavors mix, right? While I was attending culinary school, I was working in a hotel on Miami Beach, and I remember it was a beautiful open dining restaurant concept, and the guys on the line were like, "Have at it, go for it." And then they watched me in horror as I put just about everything possible into the saute pan, and that was my meal. Like I'm making my own personal meal, and we could make whatever we wanted, and not everything tasted so great, right? So it was the wrong spices basically that I was putting into it, and I guess now I can't even think about when it was, but now I know intuitively, hey, oh, that's going to go well. That's going to be a great combination, or that's going to add and benefit to this. Uh, is there a moment when, or has there been a moment when these students kind of catch on and go, "That's it. That's how I do the flavor, or that's how I season it."
Yeah, I mean, I think I cooked for probably 6 years before I even went into culinary school. Because I went into it because when I hadn't really finished anything since I had graduated, I went straight into the workforce, and tried to go. I was in and out of school all the time, and so when I realized that I was good at cooking, and this was something that I wanted to like be the best I could possibly be at, I went into school, and I was encouraged by the owner of the restaurant I worked for to do so. And there became a moment where in school where I realized that I knew the science behind what had been doing every single day.
Sure.
And that kind of goes back to how I build a blend, even for Spiceology. It's like, getting that acid, getting that heat, getting, those different characteristics, the umamis, like building onto those. There was a moment, it was probably my second year as a 2-year program, and I was doing my capstone dinner, and I had made an orange like uh, chili flake beurre blanc sauce, and I was like, it was the best sauce I'd ever made, and I was like, this is it.
Sure.
I finally figured out how to balance all these flavors, to make sure that there was like a real body to the sauce where the sweet and spicy went all the way through front to back on the bite. And I ended up getting dinged because I finished the dinner too quickly, even though everything was right. But it was like the most proud moment that I had. It kind of, those 2 years of understanding the whys of what I had been doing for
Mm-hmm.
the last 6 to 8 years was at work was starting to come to fruition. And I just knew that right there that I had the ability to create. I wanted to be a saucier right then. Like that was
Oh,
I was like, I'm going to be able to make the best sauces out here. And it's funny how it kind of translated to spices and spice blends, because they kind of go hand in hand in all reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just to kind of reel us in a little bit and
Yeah, I took us
get
down
to
the
the
wrong channel. Maybe we weren't talking flavors or future, but he did.
No
Say, I
worries.
just love that he does the mentorship program and supports the
Oh,
kids.
absolutely.
So
No,
yeah,
hey,
bring us
I
back on the right
completely.
lane,
I think
Chase.
I, I think it's been a super cool and fun conversation. I just, yeah, to your point, I want to make sure that we are making the most of our time. We don't have Tony for 2 hours, and I want to make sure that we're getting our listeners as well. So something that I wanted to talk about for you, Tony, is you work in a very innovative space within spices, and spices, now that we kind of have thought about it, are seemingly extremely expansive, and that it's almost anything that can be dried. So for you, as you look at the present landscape of spices and what's out there, is there anything as far as trends that you feel like there are flavors that are emerging or kind of just beginning to hit that proliferation point? Or what do you see as far as where we've come from, of McCormick kind of being the spice company, to
Oh,
the growth
well,
of spices?
you said the bad word, man. No, uh, no, they're great. In all honesty, they give us something to compete against for sure. But as
Sure.
far as trends go, man, every year I work with our marketing team, our marketing organization, to understand what the trends are going to be in the next year. So at the end of every year, we get together and we work on it for on and off for about 2 months, and we get to understand, what is the future. And I would say the last 5-6 years, it's really been about global flavors. Um, I would say it started to really come about, 2018, 2019. People were traveling a little bit more. They were getting access, as the internet has grown, you get more access to, anything that you want, really. But when it comes to
Sure.
food, you can look up, you can use Google Translate and look up, Spanish written recipes and convert
Hmm.
that into English. And, you can get access to any real, global influence that you really want. And so global flavors have been trending and growing over the last 5-6 years. And I think once the pandemic hit, it actually increased that need even more, because
Mm.
people couldn't
Sure.
travel as much, and there was all those restrictions. And people were having to cook at home, and they couldn't go to their favorite Chinese restaurant or their favorite Lebanese restaurant, like whatever it may be. Um, and so global flavors since then have just started to blow up. And I would say, with our trend report for 2024, we see still a huge Latin influence as far as trends go inside the U.S. I think that goes with how much immigration is happening into the U.S. right now. But not when a lot of people hear Latin, they automatically think of Mexico. But we're talking Argentinian food, which I bought a
Hmm.
book to study Argentinian food this last 2 weeks ago. So Argentina,
Yeah,
Nicaraguan food,
Peru.
yeah, Peru, like tons of Central America and down like into South America. That's where a ton
Sure.
of Latin influence is coming. I think I worked with a very popular Ghanaian chef this last year, working on a product with him. North African spices are starting to get a lot of love.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see if African cuisine can stick like a Chinese or Japanese or
Sure.
Mexican food does in the U.S. So I'm really anxious to see how that trend grows over the next decade. And when I'm talking African influence, I'm saying like locust bean powders and things that
Sure.
are that I think
Ras
would,
Al Hanout.
yeah, I think some of their flavor profiles that are very foreign to the American palate.
Sure.
So I'm excited to see how those flavors start to perform in the in the market. Actually, continuing to see a lot of global barbecue influence as well. You're seeing, a lot of Spiceology has a huge barbecuer following, and due to our relationship with Derek Wolf, and I'm starting to see a lot more barbecuers and influencers in that space, utilizing things like hibachi grills or building their own smokers out of, barrels and things like that. So I was starting to see more African style, Asian style, Indian street food style cooking in
Sure.
people's backyards and even in restaurants now. It's really cool. So you're starting to see a lot of more of those global barbecue techniques and flavors come to life as well.
That's awesome. No, I've always kind of, at least as I've started really focusing in on this discussion as we were thinking about spices, I was kind of getting a very similar thought where it feels like we're coming from an era of, the same sort of spices and spice blends being well known and used across all of food in America. And now we're seeing things like za'atar and dukkha and ras al hanout, which are kind of attributed to Middle East and North Africa. And they're gaining a degree of popularity that I feel like the actual dishes within those cuisines might not actually have, if that makes sense. So we're starting to see kind of the spices leading the way. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a really cool introduction to the broader cuisines that are, really made up or defined by those spices and spice blends.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I think, one of the goals that we have, with Spiceology is we want people to grab a blend or a spice and then figure out what they're going to make with it.
Totally.
So to your point, like a za'atar, you may not use it traditionally, but you're going to look at that jar, you're going to taste it, and you're going to say, what should I make with this? And so that's the goal that we really want to give to our home cooks and chefs is like, we're going to create a product for you, and it's going to be versatile. You may not use it traditionally, but you're going to use those flavors, and you're going to learn how those flavors are utilized within whatever cuisine it may be. And I think that's where you're going to start to see more innovation in the food space is taking a flavor profile from one cuisine and fusing it with a technique from, classical French or Japanese ramen, and you're kind of just morphing all of these things together. I think that's where we're headed. I think that's the only way the food scene can continue to grow, really.
Yeah, I love that innovation perspective, Tony. It makes me look at a lot of things that are traditional American proteins, right? Your beef, your chicken, and seafood type of things, and being able to take those flavors. It makes it I think, less scary for home cooks, even less scary for professional culinarians, right? I mean, to be able to create something on the menu that is going to be recognizable enough. Maybe it's a play off of an existing menu item that they now have added your spice or flavor packets to, because I think you really opened the floodgates of perception of spices in general by saying anything that's a powder. It certainly changes, the deep thoughts that Chase had gone back to with, herbs, right? I mean, people think of herbs and garlic and things like that as your spices, but it's really, most people shake on spices, right? Or they fold them, they marinate them. I'm curious if you see any, or if you hear a lot of things going around the plant-based world, and how flavors and spices are they being used differently, or being asked to be formulated in differently because of the carrier that they're being attached to.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with several plant-based companies over the years and have helped, innovate flavor profiles to fold into, any of the items that they're manufacturing. And I have yet to see any of them really. The plant-based world is interesting to me. I don't think I appreciate it as much as most. I think that it feels like an Atkins diet type trend. It does to me,
Mm-hmm.
where it's really popular right now. But I think as I continue to learn. A lot of the plant based is chemical based, and different.
Mm.
They're taking different organic material, but they're extracting it with in ways that
Sure.
my philosophy. I'm like, that looks as unhealthy as like a standard red protein.
Sure.
And I'm reading, if I can't understand the ingredient deck, I'm like,
Yeah, I think a
don't
lot of
know
people
about
share
this.
that sentiment. And that's why they kind
Yeah.
of took a change in where they were on the trend cycle. But they are
A
reformulating.
plant-based purist of sorts.
Yeah, I think plants have changed a bit, or plant-based thinking about food is changing, and it's becoming more holistic, right? So
Yeah.
people are trying to create things that are ingredients you can read. The whole development of the bleeding plant burger, the heme from plant, was really novel and cool, right, when it first came out. But
not for me, Dan.
It didn't have the sustainability, right?
Yeah.
So obviously they've reformulated, and other plant manufacturers are looking at things. I was just curious if you haven't really, you've obviously, you can flavor all those things, but you haven't seen a particular, you haven't had to change what you do in essence, because your spices and flavors will blend just as easily or organically into that as they would into traditional.
Yeah, I mean, it's I really haven't had to change much. We worked with a company that I actually, when it came to plant-based, they were using essentially a mushroom, but everything that grew from the mushroom under the ground, and they were using those as like cutlets. They were, that was a product that I really enjoyed, because it was truly a plant. It's not all of these extractions that are chemically, pulled out of different ingredients and whatnot. It was like different proteins or not. It was a true plant.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that. And we used the product. We used a couple of our signature products, and we seasoned them just like we would a chicken breast or chicken thigh, and cooked them the same techniques. We roasted them, we pan seared them, we grilled it, and then that was a product that I was really like, okay, this is the real stuff. When I think of plant based, I want to see real vegetables and legumes and whatnot being utilized, and then seasoning those. So when I'm using products like that, it makes spices naturally go with those.
I guess I asked that question because the whole influence of these, the Northern African, the Middle Eastern, India is 50% vegetarian. Maybe it's a different number, but it's a pretty large number, right? So you think about how they've been eating that way, and obviously they've got unique flavors, which are not particularly always from the plant, but often from the spice blends they use. So I guess that's where that train of thought came from, is, do we have to do anything different? But, why would we have to do anything different? It's another edible food item, right? Unless
last year I did a ton of studying around Indian cuisine, and probably for a full quarter worth of work. And it's funny, now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing that since that moment, I've actually cooked more vegetarian than I ever have. But I've never used, in saying that, I've never used a plant-based product to achieve that, because I'm, doing things like aloo bandas, which is essentially like a fried mashed potato ball, but it's filled with all these different vegetables and aromatics and spices, of course. And
is that the one where you break the hole in the top and you fill it all up with different?
No, that's pani puri.
Okay.
Good call, Chase.
Yeah, I gotta get better at that.
Yeah,
I'm a huge pani puri guy.
So really utilizing, vegetables and bean and legumes and whatnot, and utilizing them with, techniques that you and I and Chase have probably all learned in the years that we've been cooking. And using real techniques and real ingredients.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, if you had to look into the future of herbs and spices, dried or fresh, Are there any things that you kind of think this is something you could see happening in the next 5, 10, 15, who knows, 20 or further out number of years, as you kind of really think on the forward facing innovation?
Oh man, that's a good question. How do I think how it's gonna like evolve? Is that what
Yeah,
you're looking at?
yeah, yeah. So, to give you, I love Vietnamese food, and I think of Rau Ram, which is kind of like this citrusy, minty, kind of crazy, incredible herb. And there's also, fish mint also in
Yeah.
Vietnamese, which is, distinctly a fishy kind of grassy herb. So, to me, I think of, the future exploration and hopefully ubiquity of some of these lesser known kind of fresher seasonings and spices and, that sort of realm, just as we move towards a more global cuisine.
Yeah, man. I think the best way to answer that is kind of how I've answered a couple questions is, I think as the world begins to gain more access to different, areas that they're interested in, we'll start to see, those Vietnamese ingredients that you called out. I think, I'm sure there's going to be some listeners here that had never even heard of that, and they're going to look it up, and then they're going to go on Amazon or wherever they can order, and they're going to get those ingredients in a couple days, and they're going to try them.
Sure.
And they're, that I think that's where it starts, and then all of a sudden there's a Reddit page and subreddit, and everyone's commenting on
Yeah.
it. And, you got all the hipsters and redditors all hanging out together trying to figure it
Yeah.
all out. But
Talking herbs and spices.
yeah, I think I think we're going to start seeing a lot more Asian Pacific flavor profiles. I think
Totally.
Filipino food, Indonesia, Singapore, like those are. I think
Yeah.
that area of the world is going to get a lot of attention over the next few years. I've got to work with Chef Alvin Kylan. He's Filipino, and he's kind of opened up my eyes to a ton of ingredients and vinegars and whatnot that I had never even utilized before, and understanding how Filipino vinegar can be different than Chinese or Vietnamese vinegars, and really understanding those differences, and just trying to utilize them in my recipes, like a couple citrus flavor profiles that I've been messing around with over the last few years is calamansi
Oh
juice,
yeah.
and creating a juice powder with that. Yuzu was a very popular ingredient last year, and I think it's here to stay. You're starting to see
Yeah.
a lot more Japanese chefs utilizing it in more American style cuisine.
Yeah, it's
So,
being called out. It's being called out a lot more frequently on menus as a special, almost a special lemon in a way, right?
yeah,
I think that's how it's kind of being
exactly. So I think
perceived.
I think that's where
Yeah.
we're gonna start seeing, everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people they understand what Chinese food is. They understand what Japanese ramen and yakitoris are, and how you eat them and how you flavor
Mhm.
them. And you're starting to see Korean flavor profiles really get a following over the last 5-6 years. I think that Singapore and the Philippines and Indonesia, Vietnam, we're going to start seeing those Asian cuisines start to really become more relevant. Pho has been a huge win for American culture when it comes to Vietnamese food, and I think
Sure.
we'll start to see that just expand over time.
Yeah. I think if you focus is what you mentioned, and I take away is regionalities. We talk about that, and you started out the conversation with Szechuan peppers, a very specific region, obviously, but even just larger understanding that Asia isn't one; it's many, and talking about each of these countries, rather that they're smaller, but they all have their own flavors and their own things. And so it's interesting to hear that you speak to that, because I know we've talked about regionality quite a bit in a lot of our conversations on the podcast, and so it just seems like that's a relevant place to continue to focus, is those areas, but then maybe there's a city or a small region in North Africa that maybe has a special or known for something that's unique that'll come out, in the next few years, because it's hard to get your arms around that as a whole flavor. Like, what does that mean? There's a lot of flavors there, and there's a lot of cultures there. And, and truth be said, what's authentic, right? Even within its own country, you've got, people cooking in their homes, and then you've got restaurants doing interpretations of that too. So they're all interpreting their own version of what it's supposed to be, and then we as Americans get it, and we've created our own version of it. So what's the right version, right? So I love that. It seems to me like flavors and spices are what kind of weave it all together and bring us into the future of what we're looking at. So
yeah, I mean, those flavors define cultures in many ways. So it's great to be able to work for a company that's, to have a job that I can express those flavor profiles for everyone to grasp onto and try new things and experiment with flavor. It's like, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. It seems like it's all flavor. Sorry, Chase.
Say, Dan, no, you're fine. You made a good point where, when you start to think about the regionality of flavor, even, if someone just said, oh, this is the American barbecue seasoning, you would offend an entire chunk of the country, right? North Carolina barbecue is very different from Tennessee to Texas and so forth.
North Carolina is like split in half. They have two different barbecues.
I know, Eastern, and then you have
that's claimed to be better than one another. So it's funny how it works.
Yeah, Piedmont style is the best. I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina.
Oh my God! All right, we've taken enough time here.
There's a lot of regionality, and I think every single country is like that. And there's no good way to define authenticity and the flavor and how you put it together. It's kind of personal. I think there's a lot to be said about.
Dude, it is for sure. Side. Like curry is a perfect example of that. There isn't. I've got a book that I think it's called 600 Curries, and I'm like, and I'm just like, holy cow! And it's like this big, man.
There's so many goddamn curries, and
what's another one? Latin is moles. Like, Mexico and the moles. Like, there's not one true mole recipe, right? Everyone's got their own style and version of it. I think you're right. The regionality just it morphs everything, and it creates what that cuisine really is in any given area. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is. Hey, listen, Tony, I know we only ask you for a little less than an hour of your time, and we've hit that mark, and we don't want to keep you from your next tour. I know you're bringing the kids through the office today at some point, if you haven't already done that, but we'd love to hear.
We are in about an hour.
They're coming through again. Good. I would love to see if, just kind of let us know where we can find you if you indeed want to be found, and maybe share Spiceology's website just as a thank you and gratis. We'll make sure people can connect to you.
My Instagram is Into the Reeds, and I've got a LinkedIn, so shoot the LinkedIn. But as far as Spiceology goes, spiceology.com. If you're a home cook, Amazon's a good place to go as well. The whole catalog's not there, but all of our top sellers are. If you're a chef, hit up your broadliner or your regional distributor, and hopefully they've got some sort of product from us. But yeah, our relationships with Cisco and US Foods have really started to blossom over the last 6 to 12 months. So if you're looking for any of our product for the restaurant, reach out to your broadliner or your regional distro.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Chase, any final parting words?
Just remember to taste and season your food, everybody.
Yeah, all day.
You listened well.
I appreciate you guys. Yeah,
you listened well. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us.
And if you're looking to find and share this podcast with your friends and family, we appreciate that as well. So to all of our flavor explorers out there, everyone else, have a great day and keep tasting. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.